Good evening, everyone. My name is Tricia King-Mims. I'm the Executive Director of National Park Partners of Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and Moccasin Bend. Thank you so much for joining us for the final installment of our 2024 Rita Vital Memorial Moccasin Bend Lecture Series. As we welcome Kelly Hancock, Director of Educational Programs and Interpretation at the American Civil War Museum in Richmond, Virginia. This series was founded in 2006 by then Friends of Moccasin Bend, which is now combined with the Friends of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park to create National Park Partners. The series has been underwritten from the beginning by longtime National Park advocate and now Tennessee State Representative for District 29, Mr. Greg Vital. Through his generous sponsorship, the lecture series is offered free to the public, featuring 3 speaking events each fall, with subject matter experts sharing insights on topics related to national parks and conservation, indigenous culture and history, and Chattanooga's place in the U.S. Civil War. I'd like to take a moment to pause and remember Rita Vital, Greg's mother, who attended each and every one of the 53 events between 2006 and 2023, before she passed away at the age of 93 earlier this year. Not only did Rita love this lecture series so much that it now bears her name, but she loved attending the party at Point Park, where she often held court at a table front and center. She loved the Vital Buffalo Farm and the annual Blessing of the Buffalo each October. Most of all, she loved the Lord and loved America and always treated her fellow Americans with kindness and respect. On this election eve, let us endeavor to honor Rita's deep love for her country by committing to civility and dignity as we interact with one another. Chattanooga's National Park legacy is truly an amazing historical and cultural resource, offering over 9,000 acres and 80 miles of trails to explore. The preserved lands tell the story of 12,000 years of continuous human habitation on Moccasin Bend and the Civil War campaign for Chattanooga in 1863. Later this month, the National Park Service commemorates the 161st anniversary of the battles for Chattanooga with a series of ranger programs, hikes with the historian, and artillery demonstrations from November 23rd through the 25th. This event and other special programs can be found on our website, nppcha.org. While we are blessed locally to have a national park throughout and surrounding our city, more than 1 million visitors came to Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park in 2023 alone, providing an economic impact exceeding $87 million between visitor spending and private sector job creation. In addition to forming the stories that shaped our city, our national park continues to be a major contributor to our local economy and our quality of life. With us tonight is park historian Jim Ogden. Please join me in thanking Jim and the National Park Service for their dedication to the stewardship, interpretation, and preservation of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. Now I would like to introduce Greg Vital, founder and sponsor of the Moccasin Bend Lecture Series. Among his many other awards and recognitions, Greg was the recipient in 2008 of the highest honor of the former Friends of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, the Drew Haskins Jr. Award of Merit. He was also named Conservation Legislator of the Year in Tennessee this past spring and recently celebrated the grand opening of the Greg A. Vital Center for Natural Resources and Conservation at Cleveland State Community College. Greg and I have collaborated on preservation initiatives for nearly 20 years, going back to the early days of the Chattanooga office of the Land Trust for Tennessee. Greg was the first landowner in our 10-county area to protect his beautiful buffalo farm forever through a perpetual conservation easement, which inspired other landowners to follow his example and voluntarily preserve a total of 10,000 acres of land during the 5.5 years that I managed the Southeast Region office with Greg serving on the statewide board. I'm grateful for our friendship that continues to this day and the opportunity to grow Chattanooga's National Park legacy together. Please join me in welcoming Greg Vital.
Well, I'm really without words tonight. I think Tricia's done an amazing job remembering Mom, and all I can say is I'm honored to have been her son, and my 2 sisters and myself are honored also by the naming of this lecture series this year after Mom. She loved history. She loved Chattanooga's history, the indigenous people, the buffalo, and all the things that we have in common. So on this eve of this election night, let us just remember that we're not red or blue, we're red, white, and blue. Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Hancock. As Director of Programs, Kelly oversees educational programs and historic site interpretation at the American Civil War Museum for the general public, students, teachers, and senior adults, initiating the research, development, and implementation of programs for audiences both on and off-site. A graduate of Eastern New Mexico University and a museum professional for over 20 years, she has a passion for uncovering history and bringing to light lesser-known stories from the past. Please join me in welcoming to Chattanooga, Kelly Hancock.
Well, hello, everyone. And I'm talking about Victorian Christmas traditions and the American Civil War. And Christmas today is far removed from what it was in the mid-19th century. Yet it's during this period that so many of those traditions that we know and we love so well developed or were solidified. And it's during the mid-1800s that Christmas began to transition from a purely religious holiday, a holy day, to a secular and a commercial holiday. So I want to spend some time talking about a few of the different traditions that developed during this period. And then we're going to end by delving into some wartime accounts. So when you think about Christmas, what's the first thing, or one of the first things? There are many things that come to mind, but certainly for me, one of the first things that comes to mind is the Christmas tree. And there's a lot of debate over the Christmas tree, when you put the Christmas tree up. In my family, I'm a firm believer that you put the Christmas tree up the weekend after Thanksgiving. My husband has a totally different approach. It needs to be as close to Christmas as possible. We have the Germans to thank for the Christmas tree, and it seems to have originated in 16th century Germany, even though the use of evergreens in connection with the celebration of the winter solstice goes back much, much further than that. The first candles on the Christmas tree were inspired by Martin Luther. He is credited with this. Of course, Martin Luther being the man who started the Protestant Reformation in 1517, when he nailed his 95 Theses up protesting indulgences. But the story is that Luther was taking an evening walk, and as he was looking up through the trees, he could see the stars shining through the branches. And this inspired him to go home and put candles on the family Christmas tree. Now, it took a while for the Christmas tree to catch on in the United States, especially up in New England, because the Puritans associated the Christmas tree with pagan worship. And so it was even banned for a time in the mid-1600s. But as more German immigrants and Irish immigrants arrived to the United States, the tree began to take hold. And in Virginia, the first recorded use of a Christmas tree came in 1842 when Charles Minnigerode, a German-born classics professor at William and Mary, presented a tree to the children of Judge Nathaniel Tucker. And I did try to find out kind of when the first Christmas tree appeared in Tennessee, and I was not able to really find something, but maybe some of you may know that. Now, what truly propelled the Christmas tree to popularity was its use by Queen Victoria and the royal family. Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, or Albert Prince Consort, was from Germany, from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And he wanted his family to have the same traditions that he was brought up with, that he loved as a child. So he presented them with a Christmas tree. And the family gathered around the tree was illustrated, as you see here, in 1848 in the Illustrated London News. So people saw this image and took a liking to the Christmas tree. So it really catches hold in England first. Soon everybody in England had a Christmas tree, and then it makes its way over to the United States. And one thing that I'll point out is, as you're looking at this illustration, notice that it is a tabletop Christmas tree. This was the typical tree of the period. Although when I was doing research on this program, when I was kind of putting this together a few years ago, I did come across this photograph in a blog, and it's a 19th century CDV, carte de visite. And you can see that this man is standing behind or standing beside a full-size Christmas tree. And the photograph, this dates to about 1860. So we've got the Christmas tree as a key tradition. Another key tradition is Santa Claus. Santa originated from the 4th century Bishop of Myra in modern-day Turkey. And he became known as Saint Nicholas, with a feast day on December 6th. Saint Nicholas is a saint for children and sailors. To the Dutch, he became known as Sinterklaas, shortened from Sint Nicolaas. And his image, Santa's image, though, has evolved very much so from this very saintly bishop. One of the people most responsible for this evolving image of Santa was Washington Irving, which is maybe a little bit surprising because we tend to think of Irving and Halloween and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But in 1809, in his Knickerbocker's History of New York, which is a factitious history, he described a jolly St. Nicholas character as opposed to the saintly bishop of yesteryear. And Irving had St. Nicholas flying in a wagon over the tops of the trees. Now, he doesn't really say what makes this wagon fly or what propels the wagon through the sky. A year later, on December 6, 1810, the New York Historical Society, which was largely made up of Dutch immigrants, the Dutch in the city of New York, they held their first St. Nicholas anniversary. And prior to the toast, this little card was given out with this image of St. Nicholas. Now you see Nicholas here, St. Nicholas here, being portrayed very much as a holy saint, a religious figure. But what's interesting about this little card is that to the right of the saint, you do see that image of the stockings being hung by the fireside with care. The girl, of course, she's been good. So she's got all sorts of little toys coming out of her stocking, whereas the boy, of course, it's a boy who was bad. He has a stocking full of switches. So, and this was very much a Dutch custom. Now, the use of stockings does have its roots in the legend of St. Nicholas. And the story goes that one day the bishop overheard a poor man lamenting that his daughters would never be able to marry because he was too poor to provide them with a dowry. So, according to one version of the legend, St. Nicholas sneaked in through the chimney at night. The daughters had their stockings hung there, and he filled them with gold. There's another version, which is depicted in this 15th century painting. And you can see St. Nicholas there climbing up kind of beside, or it almost even looks like he's flying. But he's up to the window, and he has these gold balls in his hands, and he's throwing those in through the window. So if you ever had, as a child, an orange in your stocking, that's kind of where this comes from. The orange was originally meant to symbolize those gold balls. So we have this image of Santa that is beginning to change. And it's in 1821 that Santa gets at least one reindeer. This little book here, entitled A New Year's Present to the Little Ones from 5 to 12, and it's volume 3 of The Children's Friend, featured a poem, Old Santa Claus with Much Delight. And you see the illustration there of Santa and his sleigh. And it says, Old Santa Claus with much delight his reindeer drives this frosty night o'er chimney tops and tracts of snow to bring his yearly gifts to you. So Santa has one reindeer. The publisher did not reveal who the author of this poem was. But the following year, in 1822, in an interview, he stated that, quote, the author of the tale stated that far away in the north, near the Arctic lands, a series of animals exist. These resemble the reindeer, so not technically reindeer, and are feared and honored. He claims to have heard that they could fly from his mother being an Indian of the area. And this is a reference, this reference to Arctic lands is a reference to Scandinavia, to Norway, Finland, and Sweden, where the Sami, the indigenous people, were believed that the reindeer possessed magical powers. And there's even kind of a creation legend tied in with the reindeer. Now, Santa's image continues to evolve, and we get a wonderful word picture from Clement Clark Moore. Moore was an Episcopalian minister, and he originally wrote the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, for his daughters. And of course, we commonly refer to this as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And it was published in 1823, and it provides us with a very vivid word picture of St. Nicholas. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf. So this idea of Santa is kind of evolving from the bishop to more of an elf-like character. And about 10 years later, this is a painting from Robert Walter Weir. And you can definitely see that he is embracing that elf-like image of Santa. Look at the hearth, look at kind of Santa's height there in that. Now, incidentally, a handwritten copy of the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, by Moore, sold in 2006 for $280,000. That kind of gives you an idea of kind of the historical significance of this poem. Now, in addition to painting a word picture of Santa, Moore created reindeer for him. He assigns him a number of reindeer, not just one, but 8 reindeer. And 2 of the reindeer have had kind of some name changes over the years. They started out in the poem as Dunder and Bliksem, and these are the Dutch words for thunder and lightning. And then there were some versions of the poem later on that substituted the German words Donder and Blitzen. But it's the release of, first of all, the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and then the much more famous song in 1949 that solidified the names of those 2 reindeer as being Donner and Blitzen. And of course, it's also that story and then that song that provide us with the 9th reindeer, Rudolph. Getting back to Santa's depiction, one person that's very much responsible for the more modern look of Santa is Thomas Nast. And he first drew Santa in January of 1863. Nast was a cartoonist for Harper's Weekly. here you see in this first Nast image of Santa, Santa dressed in the red, white, and blue. His jacket has stars, just like the US flag. His pants are striped. If this were in color, they'd be red and white stripes. So Santa is delivering toys to the Union soldiers. So there's no question here about Santa's allegiance, or I should say Nast, very strong supporter of the Union war effort. It might be a little hard to see, but the toy that Santa is holding is a marionette of Jefferson Davis. And Davis is being hanged by a noose around his neck. Nast continued to draw Santa. Here he is in 1874, so just shortly after the war. And then by 1881, this is the image of Santa. So we're getting much closer to that Coca-Cola image of Santa. Now you can see that Santa, as portrayed by Nast, by Moore, by Irving, is a giver of gifts to children. And gift giving is certainly a key part of Christmas. And it really evolved from the Roman festival of Saturnalia. Gift giving was a part of this pagan festival that took place in December. Now, as Christianity spread, the church kind of co-opted this pagan holiday, making it their own, signing December 25th as the birthday of Jesus Christ. And it was easy to incorporate gift giving because, after all, it's the Magi, the wise men that come and bring gifts to the Christ child. And Jesus is the greatest gift, God's gift to the world. So the Christians were able to have or maintain this tradition of gift giving. There's also associated with Christmas early on this kind of tradition of begging that developed in the Middle Ages. During the holiday season, bands of young men would, and sometimes they were a bit rowdy, but they would go a wassailing. They would go from house to house. They would demand handouts from the gentry. And we see this tradition, this rowdy tradition, becoming more tame by the time we get to the mid-19th century. And it's a much more innocent form of wassailing in that people go caroling. You also have families that would gather around the punch bowl to celebrate or toast the season. So they're either punch or an eggnog. Many of the carols that we know today were written around the time of the Civil War. Jingle Bells came out in 1857, so just before the war. In the middle of the war, we have I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. That's 1863. Up on the Housetop is 1864. And then not long after the war, 1868, we have Away in the Manger. But the tune to which Away in the Manger is sung is a much older tune. It's actually taken from Martin Luther's Cradle Song. Now, other songs that we know had been around much longer, like Hark the Herald Sing Angels. This carol had originated back in 1739. And so this practice of caroling, of going from house to house, is part of that change of wassailing. And then that demanding of the gentry, we see that being carried over in Victorian England into the Boxing Day tradition, where the servants would ask of their employers coins, and they carried, it's called Boxing Day because they had these little clay boxes in which the coins were put. Stephen Nessenbaum, who authored the book, The Battle for Christmas, wrote that Christmas involved an exchange between the social classes. And you really start to see this emphasis during the Victorian era. It appears in literature, such as in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, that was published in 1843. It appeared in shops on December 19th and was sold out by Christmas Eve. It was such a hit. Charles Dickens was greatly concerned about the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And he used his writings to advocate for Christmas or for social change. Now, I assume everybody knows the story of the Christmas Carol, but just briefly, in case you're not familiar with it, it's the story of a man, Ebenezer Scrooge, who's a miser who does not have any desire to help those less privileged than himself, until he is visited on Christmas Eve by three ghosts, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. And this visit completely transforms Scrooge from being a miser to being a giver and someone who is concerned about his fellow man. In the South, on plantations, speaking of this exchange between rich and poor, haves and have-nots, it was traditional on plantations for enslaved people to call out and say Christmas gift. And when they said Christmas gift, they were given a small present: tobacco, a pair of gloves, a pipe, old clothes, etc. It was also seen as kind of a time for revelry. And in addition to receiving a break, generally between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, alcohol was involved. Verena Davis, who was the Confederate First Lady, wrote that even during the last Christmas of the Civil War, she made certain to procure the ingredients for eggnog because she said, quote, the Negroes wanted it. Now, Frederick Douglass took issue with this practice. He saw it as something that was quite dangerous because he knew that slaveholders used this as a safety valve and that it was kind of a way to convince enslaved people of the evils of freedom. Douglass wrote that slaveholders like to have their slaves spend those days just in such a manner as to make them as glad of their ending as of their beginning. Their object seems to be to disgust their slaves with freedom by plunging them into the lowest depths of dissipation. For instance, the slaveholders not only like to see the slave drink of his own accord, but will adopt various plans to make him drunk. Despite Douglass's criticisms of the evils of the Christmas break, it did provide on more than one occasion an opportunity for enslaved people to seize their freedom. There's a wonderful story that is related to William and Ellen Craft. They were an enslaved couple who lived in Macon, Georgia, and they belonged to different owners. And in 1848, they decided to escape slavery. William explained in his narrative that you see pictured here, running 1,000 miles for freedom. Some of the best slaveholders will sometimes give their favorite slaves a few days' holiday at Christmas time. So after no little amount of perseverance on my wife's part, she obtained a pass from her mistress, allowing her to be away for a few days. The cabinet maker with whom I worked gave me a similar paper, but said that he needed my services very much and wished me to return as soon as the time granted was up. Now, during their escape, William and Ellen traveled in first class in trains. They dined with a steamboat captain. They stayed in the best hotels. How did they manage to hide in plain sight? Well, Ellen was a biracial woman. In fact, she had very fair skin, and was often mistaken as one of the daughters of her white owner. So she and William formulated a plan. Ellen would disguise herself as a man, as pictured here. William would be her body servant traveling with her. And because Ellen could neither read nor write, she feigned an arm injury. So you can see here, she's got her arm in a sling. So this is how they were able to make that journey. And despite the fine accommodations, it was a nerve-wracking adventure. And by the time they reached Philadelphia and safely, Ellen was very exhausted. This is what William wrote. He said, on leaving the station, my master, or rather my wife, as I may now say, who had from the commencement of the journey borne up in a manner that much surprised us both, grasped me by the hand and said, thank God, William, we are safe, and then burst into tears, leant upon me, and wept like a child. The reaction was fearful. So when we reached the house, she was in reality so weak and faint that she could scarcely stand alone. However, I got her into the apartments that were pointed out, and there we knelt down on this Sabbath and Christmas day, a day that will ever be memorable to us, and poured out our heartfelt gratitude to God for his goodness in enabling us to overcome so many perilous difficulties in escaping out of the jaws of the wicked. And no doubt, from here on out, for William and Ellen, Christmas was an anniversary of their freedom. Emancipation and the end of the Civil War forced white people to reevaluate their relationship with their formerly enslaved workers. So that whole Christmas gift tradition fades away. But already we've seen that the trend of Christmas from being a holiday filled with rowdy drunkenness was becoming more and more focused on home and family. And Stephen Nessenbaum argues that efforts of the New York's elite to resuscitate old Dutch customs shifted the focus of Christmas away from that rowdiness. And additionally, at the same time, you've got this rising middle class, and they're eager to introduce their children to all the new comforts that the industrial age can bring. Now, in cities, people were starting at this time to take advantage of items that were available in stores, items that were being specifically sold for Christmas presents. So you can see all these commercials from newspapers. So this is starting, this advertising, this commercialization of Christmas is becoming something, but it really hasn't touched most people. Most people are still providing homemade gifts, and this is especially true in the South during the war years. So I wanted to show a few items from the museum's collection. And this is a wonderful little bedstead that was donated. And the donor wrote, during the Civil War, my parents lived in Athens, Georgia. And when Christmas came, there were no toys to be had for the children. There were two of us, my brother and myself. My mother went to a local cabinet maker and had him make a small wheelbarrow for my brother and a doll bedstead for me. She had already secured an alabaster doll head. The wheelbarrow and the doll have gone the way of all flesh, but the bed still remains a relic of the day that tried a mother's soul, and incidentally, children's souls too. And then we've got this. I think this is just beautiful. And it is a mix of a card basket and a tobacco box. This was given to a judge in Stanton, Virginia, but it's a homemade Christmas gift. Then we have a few things that were made by Verena Davis. She gave this lace collar to Mrs. Carrie Kinningham during Christmas 1861. And then her friend and neighbor, Anne Grant, received this pincushion as well as this beautiful butterfly. And the butterfly, its purpose is as a knitting sheath, a sheath for a knitting needle, but it also served as a tree decoration. So if you're familiar with the song about presents on the tree, that is something that was definitely being done at the time. Another tradition well ingrained in society today that got its start in the Victorian era is the Christmas card. Now, I tend to be somewhat traditional in the Christmas cards that I send. I like sending these, folded paper cards that have a message. But more and more people are moving to cards like this, these photo Christmas cards. And it's interesting to me because I think these are actually closer to that original Christmas card. So here's the first Christmas card. And it was the idea of Sir Henry Cole, who was the founder of the Victoria and Albert Museum. Cole had a plethora of friends, and it was a tradition at the time to write your friends a Christmas letter. And this was largely made possible by the development of the postal service and the fact that it allowed people to only send letters for only a penny. So it's an inexpensive way to communicate and give something to friends and family at Christmas time. The problem was that Cole didn't have time to write all of these letters. So what he did, and this is in 1843, he kind of sketched up a design and he went to an artist friend of his, J.C. Horsley, and he asked Horsley to design a Christmas card for him. And so that's exactly what Horsley did. And you can see there at the bottom of the card, there's kind of the to and the from. So all Horsley had to do was just kind of sign those Christmas cards. The card proved to be a big hit. Now, if you look at it in the center, there's a family gathered for a feast. So again, that holiday becoming more and more focused on family. And then also giving to the needy. That's embodied in the side panels. You see someone giving a cloak to a poor child, and then also giving of food. Now, the only thing about this card that didn't go over quite so well with a few teetotalers was the fact that the little girl there in the foreground is imbibing of some sort of spirits. So there were some people that took issue with that. But the Christmas card caught hold. Soon everybody was having Christmas cards created, and then they were being produced commercially. In the US, though, it took a bit longer, and it wasn't until the mid-1870s that Christmas cards were being manufactured here in this country. Of course, another key part of Christmas is that Christmas feast, and you see that depicted here in the middle of this Christmas card. Many of the items that we consume today are rooted in British traditions. And even though turkey is a North American bird, it was introduced to England during the reign of Henry VIII and became popular as one of the key ingredients of the holiday feast. It continued to gain in popularity in the 18th century. Of course, it was embraced by colonial Americans. For the middle-class Victorians, turkey is the preferred meat for Christmas. Americans get their fruitcake from the British. It's a spin-off of Christmas pudding. Eggnog and cookies are British as well. So let's look at now as a way of concluding at how Americans kept Christmas in the midst of the Civil War. During the Civil War, citizens in the South, soldiers at the front faced extreme shortages. But in spite of this, they did their best to carry on with the traditions, like that tradition of feasting. Andrew F. Davis, a soldier in the 15th Indiana, wrote to his daughters. He said, "My dear little daughters, this is Christmas night, And no doubt, while I am sitting in my tent in a war camp, you are enjoying yourselves at the Christmas supper, which I understand you are having at the courthouse. No doubt you are enjoying yourselves over your Christmas presents. And I hope Santa Claus in his rambles last night did not miss the stockings of my two little girls, but to put something nice in them to make them happy. I got a Christmas present this evening, which was nothing more than a letter from my dear little girl, and now I hasten to answer it. I will tell you what we had to eat today, as you no doubt would like to know. Well, we had roast chicken, oysters, peach pie, dried beef, molasses, brisket, butter, crackers, milk, sweet potatoes, eggs, rice, etc. You see, we did not starve. It was not cooked as nice as your mother could cook, but it was very good. Private William Meade, Dame of the Richmond Howitzers First Company, recalled that on Christmas 1863, they had only a little bread and not meat. He noted it was harder to starve on Christmas Day than on any day of that winter. So to deal with these hardships, he and 12 of his friends devised a game. They pretended that they were at Pizzini's, a very fine Richmond establishment, and that they were ordering their favorites. He wrote, one fellow tied a towel on him and acted as the waiter with pencil and paper in hand, going from guest to guest, taking orders, all with the utmost gravity. The first man put in an enormous order for a 4-pound steak, a turkey, a jowl, and turnip tops, a peck of potatoes, 6 dozen biscuits, plenty of butter, a large pot of coffee, a gallon of milk, and 6 pies, 3 lemon, and 3 mints. Other orders were more modest. Now, fortunately for this crew that had worked themselves up into this frenzy of imagination, a commissary wagon arrived with a box for Dame. He wrote, the fellows gathered around, the top was off that box in a jiffy, and there, right on top, the first thing we came to, funny to tell after what we had just imagined, the biggest saddle of mountain mutton and a 2-gallon jar of crab apple jelly to eat it with. That box was packed with all good solid things to eat, about a bushel of biscuits and butter and sausage and pies, etc., etc. In 10 minutes after the top was off, there was not a thing left in that box except 1 skin of sausage, which I saved for our mess the next morning. Constance Carey, a refugee to Richmond, also recalled a Christmas feast. She did that in this book, Recollections Grave and Gay. After spending a Christmas at her cousin's house, her cousin lived outside the city in King William. She recalled such a dinner, served at 3:00 p.m. after a luncheon at 12 of cordials and cakes. The host at his end of the table dispensing an emperor among turkeys. Cousin Nanny at hers, engaged in carving another ham, a ham befrilled with white paper, its pink slices cut thin as shavings, the fat having a nutty flavor with cloves stuck into a crust of sugar. She wrote, I remember a course of game and then the plum pudding with a berg of vanilla ice cream and a mound of calf's foot jelly, together with many little iced cakes and rosy apples and pyramids. This for us who had been for months living on salt pork and rice, beans, and dried apples. And if you're curious about the calf's foot jelly, I did find an image of it online. Looks to me very similar to head cheese, where it's aspic and it's ground up bits of offal, the part of the pork that they're not really using. And evidently, this calf's foot jelly was sweet in nature. Typically, when I've had head cheese, it's more savory. But there you have it. People, in addition to kind of holding on to trying to do what they could for the Christmas feast, sought to maintain other traditions as well. Verena Davis, in an article that she wrote for the New York Sunday World, This is well after the war. But she recounted community efforts to provide a tree with gifts for the orphans of the Episcopalian home. She wrote that ladies scavenged toys from their children's nurseries: eyeless dolls, three-legged horses, tops with the upper peg broken off, rubber tops, monkeys with all the squeak gone silent, and all the ruck of children's toys that gather in a nursery closet. She described how their enslaved servant Robert made a dollhouse with 4 rooms to be given as a prize to the most orderly girl. And then on Christmas Eve, the young people gathered to string apples and popcorn for the tree that was to be presented to the orphans at St. Paul's Church at 8 p.m. on Christmas evening. 10-year-old Carrie Berry of Atlanta recorded in her diary, Sunday, December 25th, 1864. We all went down last night to see the tree and how pretty it looked. The room was full of ladies and children, and Captain gave us music on the piano and tried to do all he could to make us enjoy ourselves. And we did have a merry time. All came home perfectly satisfied. This has been a cold, dark day, but we all went down to see how the tree looked in the daytime, but it was not as pretty as at night. Alfred Bellard of the 5th New Jersey noted, in order to make it look much like Christmas as possible, a small tree was stuck up in front of our tent, decked off with hardtack and pork in lieu of cakes and oranges. The hardest thing about wartime Christmas was separation from loved ones. 3 days before Christmas 1863, Nathaniel J. Cudniff, a soldier in the 10th Battalion Virginia Heavy Artillery, took up pen and paper to write to his mother in Bedford County. It is now nearly Christmas, and I expect to spend a lonesome Christmas. I expect to be on the Darbytown Road on guard at Christmas, and I would very much be glad to be at home to spend my Christmas with you, but there isn't any chance for me to come at all. Mother, the most of the company is well. For Sergeant J. Osborne Coburn, a Union POW imprisoned on Richmond's Belle Isle, Christmas 1863 was, quote, the poorest and most cheerless Christmas that I ever experienced and that I ever expected to. The weather, which has been very cold, has moderated somewhat, and we hope for better times even on Belle Isle. That was to be Coburn's last Christmas. He died in March of dysentery. Confederate soldier Edward Apps, writing to his sister Jo from the trenches of Petersburg, December 26, 1864, expressed his loneliness. Hoping you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I address you these few lines, hoping they will find you enjoying good health. Yesterday I spent in camp. It was the dullest and bluest Christmas that I have seen since beginning the war. But I hope next year that I will be able to eat my Christmas dinner in New Orleans, and though I may have a poor dinner, still the pleasure of eating it with friends and relatives will make up for the dinner. Well, although we see the roots of our Christmases today in the decades leading up to the Civil War, the war itself that helped to shape Christmas. Penny Redstadt, the author of Christmas in America, writes that, quote, the Civil War intensified Christmas's appeal. Its celebration of family matched the yearnings of soldiers and those they left behind. Its message of peace and goodwill spoke to the most immediate prayers of all Americans. So it's no wonder that in 1870, Ulysses S. Grant, as president, made Christmas a national holiday. And I'll end on that note and wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.